my brother's living all this life parallel to mine, and he actually went to prison before I did. And almost every time that I ended up in prison, he ended up in prison. So he's done a little over 7 years. But he was in prison ahead of me, and he's like, hey, you need to sign up for this program called Prison Fellowship.
Welcome to Pillars and Beans, where today we have Jesse Kaplan from Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge. And thank you for coming and the conversations we had before.
Yeah, well, it's good to be here with you, Barry. So I am currently in my full-time capacity as a regional outreach manager for the Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge Treatment Center, and I cover southern Minnesota, mostly southeast out of Rochester is where I have my office out of. And I have a few other roles that I do. I also provide peer recovery support training through a local RCO called Minnesota Prevention and Recovery Alliance. I also serve as the vice president of the board of directors for the Minnesota Certification Board, and I'm involved with a few other subcommittees and things like that. So I just really believe in taking an active role in recovery, and just really love what I do in the recovery community and faith community I'm involved with.
Busy man.
Yeah, well, it actually, as I'm saying, I'm like, well, my wife and I recently started a nonprofit, which has been going for the last 2 years. And so that's been a slow rolling thing, but an exciting thing, a Christ-centered identity ministry for people that are now coming out of these discipleship programs and them finding a place to land and fulfill their kingdom purpose and be strong in their identity together.
Great. It seems like you have a common theme.
Yeah, they all mesh very well together. It's even though I have all of these different capacities, they all seem to work pretty seamlessly together, which is fantastic.
Great, thank you for updating on that, and if you can maybe help us understand, how you got to that point where you're at, where things are all kind of melding together. It's from what we talked about before. Highly interested, and I'm sure there's a lot more that we can fill in and bring our audience up to date.
Yeah, that's such a big question. How did you get here? And meaning more than what route and car ride did I take? Because I came up Highway 52 up from the Rochester area to get here. So it was a little over an hour drive, and dropped my dog off at the Humane Society to get spayed while I'm here. So that's how I got here. But how did I actually get here, to the roles and the things that I'm in?
That's what we're talking about.
Well, interestingly, I've actually given my testimony in this school that we're in now. And oftentimes giving my testimony, I'll start off with saying, well, my story starts when I was born. And you guys laugh, but most people don't, especially kids. And then, and so, but the reason I say that is because for me, the stage was set at a very early age because I was born to my mother just a few days after her 14th birthday. My mom actually came to this country as a refugee from what's now known as Kiev, Ukraine, but was then known as USSR. And so coming up and being raised by teenage parents with parents who were culturally different, at least on my mother's side, was, already kind of setting the stage, if you will, for the life that I've found myself living and kind of dealt. What that meant for me, and then very soon after, my younger brother, his name's Andre, who was born just 14 months later. I think they call it Irish twins.
I think within a year it's Irish twins. So that's pretty close.
Yeah, they used to call us twins, and we'd never correct people. But so what that meant for, and then of course, my mom being just a teenager with two very young children, is that my brother and I grew up very unstructured. We had teenage parents. My mom was in high school. She also worked in evening and night jobs to try to support us. And my dad, just a few years older, also worked and went to school. And so, what that translated to in our daily life was nobody telling us when to turn the TV off or to brush our teeth or when to go to bed, and all that stuff sounds like a lot of fun to a kid. But it also meant that, we weren't always being provided for the way that we ought to have been. And I didn't have a point of reference at the time. Being a kid, you're not even in school yet, so you don't know what other kids are even experiencing in life. And so you don't realize what the norm even is. And so it was very already unstructured for my brother and I growing up that way, kind of fending for ourselves, and actually learned to take on a lot of responsibilities for my little brother at a very, very early age. I remember just kind of everywhere I went, Remember the commercials or the toy My Buddy? My buddy, wherever I go, he goes.
You have another career maybe here.
He was my buddy, and I would literally tote him around by the hand in his dirty diapers wherever I went. And so I took on a lot of responsibility as just even a toddler for just being my brother's keeper. And so what was already very unstructured and sort of offending for our self-environment took a turn for the worse when I was around 4 years old because my father was no longer in the picture. Now, I didn't know what had happened to my dad, but my mom explained it to me as he went on vacation. And of course, not knowing what vacation is, she tried to explain it to me as a ship that sails away in the sky and never comes back. As I get into my story, I'll talk a little bit more about what led to where I'm at today, but also what led to 10 years of incarceration in my story. And so I learned quite later in life that vacation can have another connotation.
But not a good one.
And so my dad did go on vacation, and he was actually incarcerated. And so I didn't know that. And later, I came to actually start to think that my dad was deceased, and grew up with that as sort of the backdrop for my life. But things took a turn for the worse because with my dad out of the picture, it was just my mom. And then sometimes, quite often, actually, I'd be left in the care of my uncle, my mom's younger brother. He was actually a year younger than my mom. And so while my mom's going to school and, working overnight jobs, he's providing our supervision. When I say supervision, I just mean like with air quotes. So I didn't know it at the time, either because I never saw it or I just didn't understand what I was seeing if I did see it. But my uncle had a heroin addiction. And so what would happen is when I'd be left in the care of my brother and I both left in the care of our uncle, oftentimes on a weekly, if not a couple times a week basis, he would lock us in our bedroom. And I believe he would probably be doing this when he was using heroin. So that maybe that's why I don't remember seeing it or knowing about it. But he would take a vacuum cord and he would wrap it around the bathroom door handle across from our door and then wrap it to our bedroom door handle and create a line of tension that at 5 years old, I couldn't open the door. And so it might be a morning like it is now, and we might not get out till the next day. And so, again, with no point of reference, I didn't even recognize this as like something that wasn't normal. It was just me fending for myself, fending for my little brother. And so I adapted. I was used to kind of going into the fridge and feeding ourselves and doing some of that on our own. And so I would just start to hide food in our closet so that when we were locked in our room again, I'd have food to feed us. Now as a 4 or 5 year old, because this probably went on for about a year and a half or so, what does a 5-year-old think of as a substance for food? Cookies for sure, if you can find those. Bread, one time even chewable vitamin C tablets. And that was a one-time mistake. I don't know if you've ever tried to eat those, but like 1, 2, kind of like a sweet tart snack, but try to eat 10 of them to fill your tummy. No, it doesn't happen. It's not good. In fact, on one occasion, I was hiding food, but I also hid a hammer in my closet. And I had been about 5 years old. And he locked us in our room, as it was the pattern. And by the way, we're eating. And if you can think, what goes in,
it's got to come out.
It's got to come out. And so even with no point of reference and in my own memory and the way that I remember feeling about it, having to teach my little brother and myself defecate in the corner behind our dresser as like the spot that we went was the most humiliating thing. And I hated that part of it more than any of the rest. Like I said, the other part of it almost seemed normalized to me because I had no reference. But that part was, I hated that part. But I took this hammer one time after he locked us in and we'd been there for an hour or so, as my best guess is I went over to our first floor apartment bedroom window and I took the hammer and I smashed the window out. And after I cleared some of the glass away, I took my brother by the hand and we escaped off into the neighborhood for an adventure. And then we were living in apartment buildings that were, very similar in appearance. And so there were other kids in those neighborhoods, in those apartment complexes that we loosely knew or I had friends with, and ended up actually staying the night at one of these other kids' homes. And then I remember his mom fed us, and in the morning, what I recognize now was probably pretty normal is the mom starts to ask questions like, are you guys okay?
Yeah.
Does your mom know where you are? Do you need help? Things like that. But I had already built up such a defense to adults and independence that I just lied instinctively. I said, no, our mom in fact is probably expecting us home by now. She knows that we're here. We got to go home. And so I took my brother and we left. Of course, I had no interest in going home with our full bellies and whatnot. So we ended up passing time in the area. I don't know exactly where we were, but loosely in the area where these apartment complexes were. And I remember putting rocks in my little brother's hand and pointing at a window, and we were passing the time by breaking windows with rocks.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So 5 years old, of course, somebody called the police. 5 years old, the first time I was ever apprehended by the law.
Start early.
I started early. Of course, I thought the cop was very nice. He put us in the front seat, and drove us. This is in the 80s too. Drove us to, I pointed him. I knew where I lived, so I was able to direct him to where we lived, and he knocked on the front door. And I remember our apartment had access to like a pathway because we're on the first floor. So it's single access. And my mom answers the door. Now my mom hadn't been in there the previous day when we were locked in, and the officer asked if these are your boys. And she says, yes. And my brother and I sort of walk in and we sit down in front of the TV, and, I'm 5 years old, so I don't remember everything, I don't think, but I don't have any memory that stands out to me in all of that of my mom ever really coming to ask me any questions afterwards. She didn't ask me like, what about the window? I don't remember her getting scolded for that or anything, or asking me where I had been or freaking out or anything like that. I just remember that I went in and started watching TV, and that's all I really remember about it, about the aftermath of it. Now, I know there was a conversation because my mom didn't follow us in. She stayed at the door with the officer, and I don't know what that conversation looked like. But I do probably think it started a chain of events in my life, because not too much longer after, my brother and I actually ended up being put up for adoption. And so my biological brother and I were adopted together when I was about 6 years old. And we were adopted into a really healthy, if you can imagine, a couple parents that want to love kids, a little bit older kids too, like not just a baby. Like this is a 5 and a 6 year old boy that obviously come with some history, and they want to love us, and they want to provide for us. And they did. They did. At the same time, though, I also then experienced the loss of my mother, because although I recognize now that, I wasn't getting all of the type of care that I needed. I still love my mom. And I remember, at least in the first year or so, I'd wake up at night crying, wanting my mom. And so kind of dealing with that loss as well, not knowing really how to make sense of it all, but somehow I think as I went in hindsight, sort of internalizing some of it is, what did I do wrong? What was wrong with me? Why didn't my mom want to keep me? But I really bonded really closely with my brother. And he's, again, a really important part of my story. Ended up being put in some competitive sports. Again, had at least the environment around me with all the resources that I don't think I ever had or learned to appreciate either, at least early on in life. My parents were actually both attorneys, my adoptive parents, and I call them mom and dad. And so, grew up being put into competitive sports. I played competitive soccer for a number of years, 6 or more, junior gold hockey, junior varsity basketball. And just as a part of that upbringing, and actually, growing up, I always wanted to be either a professional athlete or a police officer. And I think it has a lot to do probably with that police officer that day, because he just seemed like a hero in a sense, and he had a gun, and that was all really cool to a young boy. So, with those two directions for career in mind, I just already had decided for myself that I didn't want to use substances. I didn't want to drink alcohol. I didn't want to smoke cigarettes because I knew that those things did not add up to me being a professional athlete or a police officer. And so, until the age of 11, and I'm hanging out with older kids in my neighborhood. Back then, the computers were very slow. and I mean, Atari and the first Nintendo were around, but I think I had the Nintendo. But we played outside a lot, that's what we did. We spent a lot of time outdoors, and I was hanging out with older kids in the neighborhood. And I remember one of them was stealing cigarettes from his dad, and I would kind of pull it in my mouth and not really inhale. But then after a couple months of kind of testing the waters, I was able to smoke a cigarette with the boys, right?
Yeah,
and we'd hiding out in the alley and behind the garages and playing "Hey Mister" in front of stores. Can you buy me some smokes? And that's just that's the way it was in the neighborhood in those days. And so I kind of relented on the cigarette part, figuring that not a big deal. I'm still playing sports. I'm able to get away with this. I don't know why I thought it was a big deal. In the same situation, I'm hanging out with an older friend of mine who's a few years older than me. We're hanging out by the creek. We're catching catfish, and one of his buddies comes up and asks if we want to smoke a joint. And I recognize in hindsight that I had already primed myself with smoking cigarettes because I knew what it was like now to fully inhale, and I wasn't scared of it. I didn't think it was a big deal, and so. My friend said yes to smoking the joint. I remember we're standing around in a circle, and the joint comes around to me, and I just inhale it, the first time. And
you didn't have, when you smoked cigarettes, and you didn't choke or cough or any other?
I may have coughed a little bit on the marijuana,
but not the cigarettes.
Initially, right?
Yeah.
Initially, but then after you get used to it, it's like the pride that you can just smoke without.
Not me. I had a cigarette
it.
When I was 13. My heritage is Jewish, and I'm converted. And at 13 in the family, you could have a cigarette and a drink. Of course, the screwdriver had no vodka in it. And my mom hands me a Parliament 100.
Oh.
And the great aunts and uncles sitting around yelling, "What are you doing?" She goes, "Watch this." So I go. She goes, "Inhale." And I start hacking.
Oh.
And she goes, "Smoke it all."
She wanted you to be sick.
I went to the bathroom, got sick, and that was it.
Yeah.
For friends of mine going, "Just a couple weeks, you'll be fine." I said, I'm not going to do this.
Yeah.
So.
Smart mom.
Very smart.
Yeah.
She knew me. So I was lucky. Very lucky.
Yeah.
But, you worked through that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a progression to it. And I think the way that your mom did it seems very wise in my sight now. Kind of dabbling into it on my own and being able to kind of the thrill of it being the sneak too, and then kind of testing the water and getting used to it, quickly led to me basically being okay with smoking cigarettes, smoking marijuana, and then drinking beer. Along with the "Hey Mister" for the cigarettes, it was an easy ask to, "Hey, could you also buy us a beer or buy us a case of beer?" And then we'd go down by the creek or whatever and hang out at the park, and teenage boys and drinking beer, and so I kind of set the bar each time. I didn't want to do any of those things, but now I'm okay with this, and now I'm okay with weed and alcohol, and okay, well, it's just the hard drugs. The hard drugs, that's the stuff I won't do because that's what gets people in trouble. And so I'm actually in 9th grade. Weed is quite a habit at this point. I'm getting to where I want to smoke every day if I can. And so I make a friend in my freshman year at high school. His family is full of drug dealers and drug addicts. And so he has all the connections I need, and we become quick and fast friends. Started off with playing basketball and then just hanging out and smoking weed. So there was some commonality things that we did together. But, I had this idea that if I just sell weed to people I know in high school, because I know pretty much everybody else who smokes that I could make money off it and use it for free. And so that's what I started doing. And I went to Arlington High School in St. Paul, which is now called Washington Tech. I started selling weed in high school. And so one occasion, this had been going on for, at least half the year. And I have another young boy comes to meet me in the bathroom to buy some marijuana. And then instead of giving me money, he pulls out a butterfly knife. And, as a young boy, if you can imagine, like I look back and like, he practiced all night long. He came out flipping like Jackie Chan, and it was pretty impressive. I reached into my pocket, and just growing up the way that I did, I think back now and I just recognize how much I built myself geared around survival. And unfortunately for this young boy, this situation was no different either. So instead of pulling out the marijuana for him, I pulled out a pistol. And so he literally brought a knife to a gunfight. That's how that saying, where that saying comes
you just
from.
Keep stepping up, don't you?
So luckily, it de-escalated very quickly. He actually ran out of the bathroom, and I can hear him yelling down the hallway at school, "He's got a gun. He's got a gun." And my first thought is, wow, this guy tried to rob me at knife point for drugs and he's telling on me. And my second thought again was survival. And it's like, I've got to bail. And so I left the school, went to my friend's house his family were providing the guns and drugs. And I left the stuff there and I went home. 4 a.m. the next morning, the police actually raided my adoptive dad's house. Actually, my adoptive parents had divorced when I was 12. So they were living separately and I was staying at my dad's. And they didn't find the guns and the drugs, but with some oversight on my part, I still had live ammunition in my underwear drawer. So as a 13-year-old, I was still in a lot of trouble, even though they weren't able to find guns and drugs. I was still in trouble, and was placed on juvenile probation. And so that's when it really started, my life in the system. And I didn't make it out of the system for a very long time after that. And so from that point forward, I was constantly having warrants out for my arrest. As a teenager, you have a warrant out for your arrest for truancy or for being a runaway, things like that, for not adhering to my probationary guidelines. And so I was living life on the streets quite a bit and really just learning again to survive and to learn to sell drugs to support myself.
And where's your brother the whole time?
Yeah, really good question. So growing up, my brother and I were quite different in some of our demeanors. I think together we were on the same page, but we didn't always behaviorally act out in the same spaces. And so what I mean by that is I might be doing more of this sort of like nefarious sneaking around, maybe stealing, skipping school, selling, using, things like that outside of my home, but I was fairly reserved and quiet in the home. And I think for me, this was more built again around survival and not wanting to disrupt the place that we lived. So in order to keep it, feeling very, very, that it was very tentative to have a place to live like that. And my brother was more act out, throw tantrums, yell, flail, get angry, outbursts at home or other places. And so as my younger brother, a lot of times his sort of acting out outside of the home would cause me to have to come to his defense, and I would, because he was my little brother and I'd defend him. But at home, it actually, like I would try to get him to be more reserved, but he really wouldn't listen to that part, at least in home. And they actually placed him in a boys' school probably a year or two before I was in ninth grade. And so he was in and out of these sort of boys' schools where they were trying to like get him to go to boarding school. And, that bothered me some, but I knew where he was and he would be back and we'd visit and stuff like that. Now when I'm in ninth grade, I'm also then when I can, I'm teaching my brother everything that I'm doing as a big brother. Like I'm showing him how to use smoke and how to drink and, how to bag it up and
all the good skills,
all the stuff, because I love my little brother and I want to show him everything that I know. And so, at that point, he would go on the run a lot too. And it came to a point after the incidents with, me, bringing guns to school. My brother was doing a lot of the same activity. I don't recall what he may have or may not have gotten caught for, but it came down to basically our adoptive parents surrendering us back over to social services. Not that they lost custody or anything like that, but that they weren't able to handle us. And so we were both placed in back in foster care group homes. And so to me, that is like a confirmation of the reality that I had started to develop about the world, and how temporal families dynamics were, how little I could trust adults, and that it was basically me and my brother against the world. And so
another cycle of you two, alone.
Yep. And so sometimes what would happen in these foster care group homes is that because of our age difference, even though it was just 14 months, especially when, he was 13, I was 14, 15, and that sort of, they put us in different group homes based on age. And so he would be at a younger kid's home and we would just run away. We'd run away. And so we both started, living life on the streets, like kind of doing whatever we had to do to survive. And so in and out of juvie, then as a result, I actually had an amazing probation officer as a juvenile who I think she really wanted to help me. And I remember her asking, what can she do to help me? Because every time she places me in a group home, I'm in the front door, out the back. So I literally don't stay for more than a day, no more than a week or so, and I'm just gone. And then they got to find me again, and it could be months, or I'm living on the street. And so my brother too. And I just, I told her I wanted to go to school. And so she was like, well, if you go to school, I'll sign you up as your guardian, and I can promise you. I said, well, then they'll just arrest me at school. That's why I won't go. And she said, I'll promise you that I won't allow you to be arrested at school. And so I went to school quite a bit. I went to school. I was in and out of juvie still, because I'd still be getting arrested for burglaries and other things, assaults and stuff like that were happening, through the lifestyle I was starting to live. And, and I was when I was 16 years old, I'm in a place called Isani Boys Ranch. And I reached out through I don't even call it a private investigator, but I paid $50 for somebody to find my real mom, my adopted mom. And I don't think that was very difficult for them. That was just probably like a search, but I didn't know how to do it. So they found her and they told her where I was and the situation I was in a juvenile boys home or boys facility. And she never intended for that to be the way that I raised. Her idea, and I had a letter from her when I was 13 that I received from my adoptive parents stating that she wanted to give me the best life that she thought my brother and I could have apart from her, and that she had decided to marry another guy and give herself a better life too. And so he was very well to do. But she decided that, I could come stay with her after this Isani Boys Ranch. And that lasted all of 2 months. And so again, another sort of confirmation of the life. And so, as I'm sharing all this too, I recognize in my work today that the stuff is very extensive and very complex that people go through. And it's very rooted in other things than are happening, especially with substance use. I have not met a person in substance use that doesn't have underlying trauma and other underlying wounds that are the cause of that. So I stayed with her for about 2 months. Her husband that she had put us up for adoption so that she could marry, still felt the same way about raising people's other kids. It wasn't something he wanted to do then, and it wasn't something he felt good about doing now. And so I came home from high school one day and had a duffel bag packed and $50 in an envelope, and she said, he doesn't want you here. And I said, okay, well, that means I'm going to have to go back on the run. I'll have a warrant for my arrest. And she said, you're just going to have to deal with it. And so I left. I went, I'm 16 now, and I'm driving cars. I don't have a license. I'm doing a lot of different things. And, when I was living this life, I started just to have the idea of, even though I'm using alcohol and marijuana, I could sell harder drugs and not use them and make more money to support myself. And so that's
another step.
Yep. So another compromise and things that I was doing. And at first that's how it was, right? I was selling them, used to kind of mock or laugh at people or think that way about people who used them because I was determined that it would never be me using them, but I'll sell them. And all of that sort of lasted for a time until I met a girl who was much older than me. I had a fake ID coming out of a bar. She was 9 years older. And I had started somewhere along the line, I actually started partying with like pills and like promethazine and those sort of things, never considering them a hard drug.
What's promethazine?
So like lean, you actually it's a cough syrup. It's like a prescription cough syrup that usually has like codeine or something in it. And I would, drink some of that in a 7-Up or Sprite or something. Or I'd take pills, and either ecstasy pills or maybe like a Loratab, or there was just a bunch of different prescription pills out there that occasionally I might take one while I'm drinking or something and to party. And I never thought of them as hard drugs. And I look back now and I recognize that, those were hard drugs. And again, I'm priming myself like I did with nicotine to marijuana. I'm priming myself for other narcotics. And so I met this girl who was much older than me, 9 years older, in fact, and she partied with meth. I really wanted to impress this girl. I really thought she was cute. I'm 17, she's 26, and she's willing to hang out with me. And she also thinks I'm 23.
Okay.
And so I tried methamphetamines for the first time. And again, sort of that fade into compromise. And so I'm like, all right, not totally bad experience here, not what I thought. I don't mind partying from time to time. And that's how it started. It didn't grip me overnight, but now I was willing to party with harder drugs. And over time, that became progressive to where I'm taking, there was a period where it was more like partying with the harder drugs, but now I'm taking the pills more regularly, more like on a daily basis, and partying with the harder drugs, because what seemed exceptional before now became normal.
And normal keeps escalating to more and more and deeper.
Exactly.
Deeper.
And so then and now I'm a dealer of a smorgasbord, because if anything I can sell, that means I have a better access to use it with less overhead. So I'm still very
good business model.
Yeah. So, those weren't probably the terms I was using then until later. I went to college for business management. But so from the age of 18, actually at 18 years old, I got kicked out of the state of Minnesota. I was going to go on what's called EJJ, Extended Juvenile Jurisdiction. That same girl that I was just mentioning was pregnant, however. In fact, it was quite funny. I called her from jail, and she answered the collect phone call or whatever it is. And she says, "Why are you calling me from a juvenile facility?"
You're 24.
Yes. I'm like, well, see what had happened was, you're not going to go to jail, but I'm actually 17 years old and you're pregnant. And so she thought, I'm going to go to jail. No, you're not. And so I actually did end up going to another juvenile facility called Chamberlain Academy. My brother actually at the same time was in Elmore Academy, which is a Minnesota-based juvenile facility for other crimes that he was committing. And I went to Chamberlain Academy for an assault charge, and it was 6 months. And so I actually wasn't going to be released until I was already over 18 years old. And so the courts were going to make a determination. They went from that facility back to court. And it was to see if I was going to go on extended juvenile jurisdiction, which basically means I'm still on probation as a juvenile, but now as an adult. Or the woman that I was mentioning had moved to Louisiana while I was in that lockup and was getting ready to have my first daughter. And I let that be known to the courts that I wanted to go down to Louisiana and be with my newborn daughter. And so they gave me an ultimatum that I could either go on EJJ, probation as an adult, or I could be banned from the state of Minnesota for no less than 365 days, and I'd be free to leave, but not to return for at least 1 year. And of course, that's what I said. Yeah, I'm out of here. See ya. Needless to say, that relationship was not a healthy one, and it did not last very long. I did get to be there for my daughter's birth. I did get to cut her umbilical cord. She was a heavy drinker, and then in Louisiana, I was also smoking weed and drinking still, although I had kind of left the more higher level dealer life because it was a newer environment to me. I was maybe dabbling a little bit, but ended up not being a healthy situation with her or her family down there. And so her and I actually ended up exiting Louisiana to move up to Michigan, where she had a friend, and then her and I's relationship continued to struggle, and I actually left. I walked out on my daughter's first birthday. Yeah. So, and I went back to Minnesota. I actually told I told the mom that I was going to go to a hotel because we were not getting along. And that, in fact, instead I just went and got on a Greyhound. I came back to Minnesota.
But that was at least a year later.
It was like a year and 2 months later. So it was a little over the year later. And so I just figured I'm going back to Minnesota, and I called my brother, and because he was still in Minnesota. And so, and he was established here still. It's doing all the same stuff. And so when I came back, I just went right back into it. Like, the drugs were put in my hand. I had everything I need to try to reestablish myself as, somebody that, has money and drugs. And so that's the life I started living instantly again. I remember I did spend a couple months just devastated and missing my daughter. In fact, there was like a 2-month period where I'd wake up with a stomach full of bile every day, just from the stress of missing my kid. But drugs cover that. The lifestyle quickly catches up to covering all of that, and you start to be neither here nor there with a lot of things, including emotions like that. And so I had about an 8-year run, along with my brother being my right-hand man. We were kind of each individually doing our thing, but doing a lot of things together as well, and sharing some connections and things like that. And there was some muling, traveling to the southern border and bringing stuff back, and things that we're very fortunate to still have our freedom right now. And I think a greater freedom even now I'll get to knowing today being in Christ. My adoptive parents, I'll just go back to say that they weren't religious people. They weren't very practicing in their faith, but my heritage biologically, my mother is being from Kiev, Ukraine, is my Jewish side, and then my dad, who's born here, is Swedish Norwegian. So I ended up being adopted by my adoptive parents, who my adoptive father was Jewish, and put us in Saturday school. So
I remember
learning the Torah, and I never followed through at 13 the way you did.
Yeah.
And I wasn't interested in it, but I did get some time in Saturday school as a young lad. And my mom was raised Lutheran, so I would occasion church on Easter or Christmas. And so
you're a Christer.
I never, neither one of them really rooted in me, but I always did have a firm belief that there is God. I just didn't think he cared about me. And so that, I always had that sort of, that seed, I guess, planted from being adopted and growing up around that a little bit, that at least God's real. Again, just not interested in my welfare at all. And so being back in Minnesota, I had about that 8-year run. And of course, if that had continued that way, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But I started getting investigated by the police, and started getting raided, some of the homes that we're in. I remember actually at one point looking in the mirror and thinking, I made it. And it seems so foolish to me now to think in those terms, but that's exactly where I was at. I was thinking, I have all the money, I have all the cars, I have multiple places to live. I have power. I have status. I made it. I felt I was untouchable. And of course
Congratulations.
that crumbled fairly quickly. I idolized the Goodfellas and Tony Montana. In fact, I had framed posters of them in one of my houses. And, I ended up getting raided, getting investigated, was arrested for drugs and guns, and have hired a private attorney, right? I thought I was untouchable, and fought my first charge for 2.5 years with a private attorney. And during those 2.5 years, relatively sobered up because I needed to join the military. And that was my game plan. First, remember, if you think about this stuff, it's all survival. And I look back, even as I'm speaking, it's all survival. Like I joined the military for the only purpose is to get out of this, because I knew I was pretty caught. Yeah, I had a private attorney. He was probably kind of a scumbag attorney. I don't think he was of the best character either. I think he knows I was dirty and he wanted cash. And, I even had another attorney that was like helping me to connect him to other clients who were in the life too. So like, just not the best rapport there. So I ended up joining the military.
Which branch?
National Guard, as a flight operations 15 Papa. My recruiter, I became an assistant recruiter. I was doing pretty well. So it took me 45 days to finally pass a UA. So my recruiter was testing me on the side because I couldn't get in time. It took me 45 days of not using to be able to pass a UA because of the amount of I was using. Particularly marijuana was in my system for a very long time with the heavy amounts I was using. And so I finally did get in, and I only stayed in the military for probably about 8 or 9 months. While I was in the military and going to basic, I had wanted to be a Chinook mechanic, 15 Tango, not 15 Papa, and I thought the recruiter must have made a mistake.
What's the difference between Tango and Papa?
So one's a Chinook mechanic, a helicopter mechanic, and the other one's flight operations. And so there, one of them is a more hands-on sort of job in the hangar, and the other one is more like in the tower directing flight operations and things like that. So and one of them with being the Chinook mechanic, it can put you on a pathway to being a pilot too. And I had actually tried to join the Air Force first. I couldn't because I had a GED. I graduated with my GED on that last juvenile placement. I earned a GED actually ahead of my graduating class. So I got my GED in March 2002. My class didn't graduate till June. So that was always my one up there. And I actually graduated within the top 10 percentile for the school district for GED scores. I remember I got a certificate for that. So I was smart kid, kind of naturally inclined towards academics and things like that. And so I tried to switch my MOS in the military. And I think the reason my recruiter did this is because it requires a higher level of security clearance to be the Chinook mechanic. And with my current charges that I was pending, I got flagged when I tried to switch my MOS to a higher security clearance. And they sent me back to Minnesota to just serve out my time on the base here in St. Paul. And then, I was doing my weekends or whatever, and then going to court for the charges. And so I had ended up taking a deal for probation, but the judge had, for my sentencing, had subpoenaed a major and my staff sergeant to attend the sentencing because they knew I was in the military. They knew I was on a deployment roster for Iraq. I'm literally supposed to go to Iraq like within the next month. And, but I have to deal with this court case. And I pled guilty put myself in the judge's hands with the understanding that I was going to likely get probation, right? And be able to serve my military term. Well, the staff sergeant was, he was my recruiter. He was a buddy, even though he was very supportive and was writing letters. Now, my lawyer was supposed to subpoena the major that we wanted, but he failed to do that. So the prosecutor supported the major, and I had never met the guy before. And so when the judge asked him, so he interviewed the staff sergeant, and he said, yes, he's a good soldier. He can go to, we'd like to have him. The judge asked the major, I'm going to ask your superior officer, do you guys need this guy? And the guy answered it very by the numbers. He said, well, I can't say we need him because our capacity right now is at 121% or something like that, he said. Oh. And I remember the judge kind of going, okay, 5 years. And he slammed the gavel down. And just like that. In fact, my adoptive dad, I remember, I said they're attorneys, he spoke up in the courtroom and just asked them to give me a chance to do the military. But, he wasn't really even though he's my dad, an attorney, he didn't really have a voice in the courtroom. And I remember the news was there and they printed an article about this. And I remember my lawyer said, you've become the great white defendant. Your case has made the news, and it says that, this guy tries to go to the military or to get out of these charges. And that's what I was trying to do.
And now you're a star.
They were right. I mean, they were right. So they had it right. So instead I thought I had no idea I was going to prison that day. I mean, I was dressed in a suit. I had not got my affairs together. And they took me in. And, I probably broke down for a second, and then I went back into survival mode. And I ended up doing, from that time forward, I'll kind of skip forward. I ended up doing 4 different times in prison. I have 7 felonies on my record. I have 4 drug cases, 2 pistol cases, and a terroristic threat. 4 times in prison for a little over 10 years from that point. And that was 2008. And so every time I get out, I kind of go right back to the same stuff. And what's interesting is while I was in prison, my brother was in and out of prison too. So, my brother's living all this life parallel to mine, and he actually went to prison before I did. And almost every time that I ended up in prison, he ended up in prison. So he's done a little over 7 years. But he was in prison ahead of me, and he's like, hey, you need to sign up for this program called Prison Fellowship. It's called IFI, or Inner Freedom Change Initiative at the time, and now they just call it Prison Fellowship Academy. It's part of the Prison Fellowship Ministry. That's an international ministry. And they operate a Christian principled program within the prison. They have what's called a level 3 program in only 2 places in the United States that I'm aware of right now. I think they used to have 4, but now it's only 2, one in Minnesota and one in Texas.
And what's level 3?
A good question. So it means that they have a set-aside unit that the participants in this program all live together in. So it essentially within the prison, there's another community of people learning about from a Christian biblical perspective, principles for living life. And so at no point are you, kind of like what Teen Challenge is, at no point are you required to convert, but we absolutely believe in these things, or they believed in these things, and they teach these things. And so I started learning more so than I had learned growing up about this figure named Jesus. And, in 2009, actually, remember, I'm academically inclined.
Right.
And I recognize this as the truth. And though I would say my heart was far from it, I assented that I should probably gather some fire insurance.
Survive again.
Yeah, I should probably gather some fire insurance and make this confession and be baptized. And so that's what I did in 2009. And I remember before I went in the tank, I was talking about this path that we walk that is checkered. And I don't know what I was not thinking, this is my Lord. I just, again, would, I'll allow him to save me from a fire, because that's probably a smart thing to do.
Where you're heading.
And so, I don't know. It's an interesting thing that I'll look forward to asking God about, is when did it actually take effect? Because I don't think my life reflected in any sort of form or fashion, internally or externally, a life renewed. Although I wonder that if when I opened my mouth to make that confession, he put his claim on me. Because I came back to prison again on my second incarceration. And I'm actually in prison, smuggling drugs, using drugs. And again, I'm in this Christian program because every time I come to Christian, I mean, this is the spot to do time, right? I mean, it's like less lockdown. I mean, it's like you're getting to.
And you're dealing drugs in the
Yeah,
level
this
3?
time I was. This level 3 program, a medium custody program. And I got caught doing that. I got caught with smuggling and dirty UA for methamphetamines in prison. And they put me in segregation.
What's segregation?
Segregation is where they put you in a very small confined cell with very little to do in there. And you're locked in there 23-1. So the 1 hour you get out, you get put in a cage that's outside, like a dog kennel, basically outside, so you can get some fresh air for an hour. And the rest of the 23 hours, you're in a cell. They bring
It's isolation.
It's isolation. Yeah, segregation, isolation. And I'm in this cell, and I'm in prison for the second time for drugs, and I had manipulated doctors to prescribing me medication for the purpose of both abusing and selling them in the prison so that I could continue to administer drugs to people and use them myself. And then also I'm smuggling actual narcotics or a part of that group that was. And I'm in my segregation or isolation cell, and my medications that are abusive levels of prescribed because of my manipulation of doctors, and they give them to me, and I've become very proficient at what's called cheeking or cuffing them, and then so I could either sell or use them later. And so I did that, and I used them. Not much else to do in a cell like that, and so but I felt nothing. I remember I felt nothing from it.
So your tolerance is so high that it didn't affect you anymore?
I don't know if it was my tolerance or the reality of where I was at in life. Second time in prison, inside of prison, in a smaller confined prison. And it just struck me in that moment that it's like, I've been hearing about this concept of being a slave to sin. And as I thought about that, I was like, well, what is my next smallest box? Because I'm in this segregation cell, I'm still doing the same, perpetuating the same behavior, and I feel nothing from it. So what is it going to take? And I thought, well, the next smallest box has to be a coffin. And I just was like, I came to this stark reality about my life and where it was headed and where I was at, and realized that my best survival, smart as I was, has got me exactly where I am right now. And this God who says he wants my life probably can't do any worse with it than I am.
Yeah. And you're pretty good at it.
Yeah. And so I believe that this was my conversion prayer in that segregation cell. It was August 5th, 2012. And I just said to the Lord, I was probably talking to him out loud in my cell, and just said, you say you want my life. I don't know why. Good riddance. You can have it. And I didn't have any reservation with it. It wasn't conditional. I just knew that, I won't hold back, but if you want this life, you can have it. And it's yours. I don't know why you want it, but.
That seemed to be a theme that maybe I'm misreading it, but things get bad for you, and then there's the presence of God. You think things are going good, but they're really bad. Then they get really bad again. There's the presence of God, and then finally you hit a wall.
Yeah. Well, there was 4 walls. They were all cold. And so I just my pills came around again, and I said I don't want them. They say you can't just quit this level of medication. You're going to have to sign a waiver to stop this, so they're not liable. And I signed the waiver, and I had struggled with a lot of things, with some mental health things, and including I had been in a car accident, so I had some back pain that I'd wake up every morning and have to stretch out just to get my back moving somewhat normal. I had struggled with insomnia, being able to sleep through the night, depression, ADHD, so the ability to focus. And after I signed off, waved off my meds, and I kind of said that good riddance, you can have my life prayer. I remember sleeping for the first time solidly without the assistance of medication.
How many years of insomnia?
Well, I was living a life that a lot of times didn't require a lot of sleep, or didn't accommodate a lot of sleep. And so, I probably been living like that since I was a teenager, and now I'm in probably over the last decade. And so I slept through the night, and when I woke up in the morning, I got up and I stood up, and it just a stark reality to me is, wait a minute, I didn't have to stretch out my back. My back feels 100%. And I just knew. I was like, oh, this has to be God. This has to be God. And so I began a search and to know him. Who did this? He did it. I knew he did it, but who is he? And one of the small accommodations you're allowed in that isolation cell is a book or two, and one of them's the Bible. And so I read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, because how else do you read a book, right? I knew nothing. Right. Nothing. So over the course of the next 30 days, I read through the entire Bible. And I developed a sensitivity to things that were once common to me, things that I now identify as sin in my life, sensitivity to the way that I spoke, to sexual integrity and things like that. And then I got out of, I ended up getting into some programs that, helped me study the Bible, and was very assured that I was going to do things as a Christian now. I got out of prison. I had another daughter before I went in for this incarceration with a girl that I've known since I was 10 years old. Her name's Christina. And, she had said to me that she had actually gotten in contact with me during my first, so I'd known her for quite a long time. She said, I'm not going to do a third prison bid with you, because she'd done the last two. But I didn't think I was going to have to go back. So I actually went back to prison in record time, 3 months.
You don't mess around, do you? Everything you do seems to be head down, serious, full speed ahead.
Yeah, 3 months. I was relapsing on nicotine, it's alcohol, meth, and it happens rapidly. It's the same compromise, just in fast forward. And so actually ended up blackout drunk and got into a domestic, which ended up resulting in a conviction for that terroristic threat I have against my kid's mom within 3 months. And I was devastated. I'm sure she was devastated. She was devastated. And so I actually went back to prison within 3 months. And I was more disappointed with the way I thought my life as a Christian, the way it was supposed to work out. But God didn't bless all the things I wanted to do. And so I'm back in prison, and I didn't stop believing. I don't think I ever lost. I think that's why I think I was rooted in that time, because I don't feel like, even though I struggled and I did, I was working out my sanctification, and he didn't allow me to go very far this time. It's 3 months, you're done. But I did walk away from being very active in my faith or praying or reading the Bible anymore. I knew he's there, but it's just not, again, my lot in life is just not for me, not all that concerned with what I have and who I am. And so I actually got released again. I moved down to, I actually went down to Utah, where my adoptive father had moved down to. And down in Utah, it's not all that far from the border either. It's pretty close to Phoenix and some other areas.
Southern Utah, St. George area?
He was in Salt Lake.
Salt Lake?
But it's still, all relative.
Yeah.
I'm used to going down there from Minnesota, so being in Utah makes it a way closer jump to go there and back. So communicating with my brother while I'm there, I actually went to Utah because my adopted dad lived there, so that qualified me for what's called an interstate transfer. And I did my parole there, and it was much easier in that state. And so I was able to make it off parole. When I made it off parole, my brother actually, so him and I were working things together, and he would come down and I would come up, and, we were causing all kinds of stuff that we shouldn't have been doing and never got caught for, thankfully. I know we were being investigated though. And, cause we'd see him watching us. As paranoid as that sounds, we were kind of used to it and knew what to look for. And so we knew they were watching. Probably a matter of time my brother is actually out. By the end of this thing, he was out on $750,000 bail bond and was still walking around, still being watched. And I was in Utah, and my brother got a phone call from my younger brother, Andre, that he was robbed. He was hit with a pistol. They took his money, took his drugs from him. And I was like, all right, that's it. I'm coming back to Minnesota. While I'm living this new life, I had kind of stepped back from wanting to lead and be all that I can be in that life. You know, no more Tony Montana dreams for me. If I can just survive, I'm good with that. And so I kind of let my brother take the reins and start to lead it, which he was glad to do. And, you know, as long as I have what I need, and I'll just kind of sit in the back and I'll help enforce for him. And so I went back to Minnesota because I wanted to protect my brother, watch his back for him, and help him as much as I could. And we'd help each other. It's the reality of it. I mean, he could take the reins and I could have all the money and drugs I needed without having to facilitate anything. He can kind of do it. Of course, I'm still getting arrested. I ended up racking up 4 different narcotics charges while I was back in Minnesota. Was supposed to go to Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge, but because I kept bailing out and getting other charges, I had 4 different counties, and finally one of the counties just said, no, you're going to prison. They gave me 54 months, and or was it 44 months? 44 months, I did 30. And while I was in this 4th incarceration, a few months into it, back to that prison fellowship program, right? I got a routine now.
Yeah, you know, like, figure it out.
This is how I do it, and I'm okay with it. This is the life, and I go on kind of this pattern, this merry-go-round cycle for the 4th time. I'm back in the prison fellowship program, and I'm doing time with, I got buddies now that I do time with. And one of them sits me down. He said, hey man, you got to sit down. I got to tell you something. He's like, your brother. So my brother's address was actually our buddy's mom's house. That was on his ID. So the police had gone to his mom's house, and he said he was in a motorcycle accident. He crashed his crotch rocket, they think going over 100 miles an hour. Come to find out they said they're going to amputate his arm, is what he told me. They're going to amputate his arm because he about cut his body in half. And they don't know if he's going to make it, but they're going to have to amputate his arm. And, I have kids, and at this point I wish they were enough but something just in me just said, no, I can't see my brother with one arm.
So your kids weren't enough to have you stop?
No, I mean, as much as I could care about my kids, I think I maybe struggled with that because of my own upbringing. But I think, I loved my kids, but it was just so hard to leave the life and the drugs and everything else for them. But when this happened to my brother, I couldn't imagine. I just could not imagine my brother with one arm. And it just devastated me. It broke me. And I stepped out into the prison yard, and I hadn't prayed in at least a couple of years, since being devastated the previous times. And, I just asked God to save my brother's arm. Just please have mercy and save his arm. And my whole body got flooded with what I call God bumps when I said that prayer. Quite stark contrast to the way I was actually feeling inside. And I went back in. I told I said, his arm's going to be all right. They're going to fix it. And he kind of patted me on my back, like it's going to be all right, man. Yeah. You're probably in shock, which I probably was. But long story short, his arm was saved. In fact, they had to resuscitate him 3 times. But by proxy, his arm being saved is a better prayer.
Yeah.
So he's alive. And that started me on a journey. So part of this prison fellowship program is they require you to do devotions Monday through Friday in the morning, 45 minutes of devotions, in your word, in your curriculum, spending time with God, or at least studying as part of the program. Well, I was sleeping through all of that. I wasn't doing any of it.
No surprise there.
No, I had walked away. Like I said, I believe I still was a person of faith. I just was not practicing, and I was not about to wake up and do devotions. And this is the stubbornness of where I was at, and God met me there. I said, all right, God, you saved his arm. Good job. I'll read 1 sentence a day. I'll read 1 sentence. I'll wake up in the morning for these devotions, and I'll read 1 sentence. and I had a daily bread. You're familiar with that devotional little pamphlet? And I started reading the first sentence of the day for each of those. Well, that first sentence actually happens to be a scripture. And so every day I was reading one scriptural verse and then putting it back down and going back to sleep. But then sometime throughout that day or that week, not every time, but often enough, that scripture would come alive in some way and reveal something to me in that day or that week that was highlighted for me. Like, whoa, like this, that, and then what I'm seeing, like this, these are lining up here. Like this thing's alive.
That cycle keeps happening. He keeps knocking, doesn't he?
Yeah. So, I mean, of course, that led into me reading the entire Daily Bread. And actually, for the first time out of 5 tries, I actually graduated the Prison Fellowship Academy 1-year program. It was when I made a decision actually to graduate the program. And I decided that if I was to get out of prison and keep doing the same things I've always done, I was very likely just going to end up back in prison. Now, my brother was, he was alive. His arm was saved, but he was in a group home for people that are disabled, and it wasn't a very good one. I mean, he had to learn how to talk all over again. And I remember at one point me just asking, brother, are you in there? Because he was just stuttering and could not speak. And he stuttered out, yes. And I was like, all right, I got to get to him. I got to help him. And so I, knew I needed to do something radical. I mean, I've lived my life like this since I was essentially 11 is when I really just started going off the other way. And so I found out about Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge, that I could still go to this program with my incarceration time because they look at the day you were incarcerated, and I was high on meth that day. So I still qualified for the program. I told, after going through this program for a year, I developed quite a relationship of prayer and listening to the Lord, and was leading Bible study groups. And I just told God, you want me to go to Teen Challenge? Because I still had the brochure from when I was supposed to go there before my incarceration. It was one of the items I was able to bring with me, and I felt like God was just leaving me like a breadcrumb, like a footprint for me to follow. And I was just like, okay, I'll still go. And so I did. I made a decision to go. At that point, when I made that decision is actually when I started getting some dreams and revelations about starting a ministry called Sons of Light, because I was seeing people going through this prison fellowship program, like myself, that were then still struggling with identity when they got out. And so I knew that there had to be a way to keep people from going back. And it needed to be a strong community of like-minded people to cultivate that for them. So they had that sense of belonging, because I'd go to church when I get out, but it just didn't stick. I didn't feel like I belonged. I didn't feel like I was understood. And so I started writing things in a journal then, but I ended up graduating that program, and I still had another year to do. So I stayed in that program, giving Bible studies, and then went to Teen Challenge the day I got out. And so I ended up graduating the Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge program a year later. During that program, I called my kid's mom, because we hadn't actually talked to him.
Which kid? So
good question. The younger one. The one that I've known since I was 10. So the one that's with my older child, her and I we've been friends from a distance at best. And so not a lot of communication, but no interest in rekindling that at all. So I had, with my younger child's mother, started having family therapy sessions, which is a resource Teen Challenge provides. And I started not only taking care of my own stuff, but started being able to address the hurts and harms that I left with my family, and abandonment for almost 6 years. And so I started seeing her and my daughter, and on a level 4 pass, actually ended up.
What's level 4?
Level 4 pass. So Teen Challenge is 4 quarters that are programming steps. And then as you start to progress in the program, you start to have a little bit more integration into the community, passes, going home. And so I was on a pass where you get to leave the treatment center and be with your family. And I proposed to her at a Grace Church at a Blessing Tour concert from Carrie Job. And she said yes.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah. And I mean, that had started from God putting in my heart that I needed to love her the way that he does. And so I knew that was a call to marry. So I ended up graduating with honors, and had applied to our Teen Challenge Leadership Institute, which is a college program for our long-term men and women that are graduates. But then they actually offered me an internship to work in the community and prevention department, which actually goes to middle schools and high schools. One of those schools being the very school that we're in now, and that's God. But started giving my testimony and talking about recovery and Teen Challenge to middle school and high school students as an internship for about 4 years. Married my kid's mom, now my wife, Christina, after 3 months of graduating the program, decided to do everything God's way and waited until we were married to move in. And then became a peer recovery specialist. And so I spent about a year working as a peer recovery specialist at Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge. And was working in the department that I was working in, actually started and established itself as a separate entity as an RCO called Minnesota Prevention and Recovery Alliance. And so I worked with them for that year as a peer recovery specialist. And then they hired me as a recovery and support manager. And so I was managing a team of peer recovery specialists for about another year. And then an opportunity to become a regional manager for Southern Minnesota for Teen Challenge came up. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 2 years. And about 2 years ago, we established our nonprofit called Sons of Light. So, and now I get
Things are just going faster and better.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we will have to do a part 2 because there is so much that God is doing now. It's what I get to do every day. I get to go to jails and prisons as a part of my role and talk to people. And I get to play a cog in the wheel of bringing people to Christ. I get to talk to people about what I went through. And it's not about me, but it's about the person that I encountered that now they have an opportunity to encounter. And there's a hope that's transferable. There's a hope that's transferable from that person to them because that person gave it to me and I'm bearing witness to it. And really that's what it is. And treatment is just a platform. People are given a burden of ministry or for outreach to a certain people group. And God doesn't waste things. And there's no other path that I could be walking out that is so redemptive in its quality to use all of those terrible things that I just talked about. And don't get me wrong, those things were terrible. And I don't mean to glorify any of it, but it is the reality and the truth. And when I share this story,
right.
But only in God's hands could those things, even for a podcast like this, be used for his glory. And I often say trained in the enemy's camp for the Lord army. It's not a training you want to go through.
No, that's...
But it's not wasted. And I'm so grateful for that because, on paper, it's horrible. I mean, I'm telling you this story and you're looking at a changed person and I hope you can tell, but on paper, it's horrible. It looks like a horrible story. It's like a horrible person.
Just recalling the headlines is like, this.
Well, it lists all my felonies and the criminal complaints and it's all bad.
Pages,
literally. There's a book of it. But now I have DHS clearance to set aside those charges and allows me to work with clients.
Congratulations.
I would think that if there's anything, so I went through that prison fellowship program, and this is kind of where I wanted to get back to, is I was in that prison fellowship program 5 times. I applied for Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge 4 times. Anybody would have been very right in saying he doesn't deserve this chance. He doesn't really want to be here. He's not taking it serious. He's not going to get it. And they would have been right. But God, seeds were planted. And because of the grace of Prison Fellowship Academy and allowing me to try again and try again and try again and try again and try again.
And one more time.
And Teen Challenge accepting 4 applications and then allowing me to come into the program. After my 4th application, I finally came in. Because of that grace afforded to me, which I think is really just the hand of God in through these ministries, those seeds that were planted started to grow. And I mean, the Bible says, the word says that a mustard seed, which is the smallest of seeds, grows into the biggest of trees. And now look what God's done with my life. And it doesn't just affect my life. My brother, by the way, is doing better than he's ever done.
Right.
He's no longer in a wheelchair.
Great.
After his brain injury, he couldn't remember anything for the last decade, which good for him because the
wasn't
investigations that we had open on him were all dismissed because of incompetency. And now he reads the Bible more than anybody I know. He couldn't learn, he had to relearn how to speak, but he could remember scripture. It was the most incredible thing. I mean, he followed me into a confession of faith a long time ago, but he actually said when he could talk again that he knows that if he would have died on the highway, he just knows he was going to hell. And I don't question that. And that's what he believes about it. But now he's so a light, and he just loves Jesus, and it shows. And I'm restored with my kid's mom, and
Right.
our 2 daughters live with us, and they're seeing a totally different side of things. And I think they're pretty off put by the drug world and scene. They know the damages and the reality of what it can do, but they also know the redemptive power in
Right.
Jesus and
Yeah.
what he can do.
But I would like to interrupt you for a moment, and it's something that I learned from a friend of mine that helped me with this business years ago, who's passed away, and we had a discussion that there's God's will, and he was obviously playing in your life, and then he gave us free will, and you had your free will. We all have our free will, but when we align our free will with God's will, things go a lot easier, and things go a lot better. And it took a lot to get your will lined up with his, so
Yeah.
that's not easy. And I just want to commend you for what you did.
Yeah.
What you did in the past was not great, but he didn't give up, and then you gave in and it got aligned, and look what you're doing now. It's a great role model for people.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
And I don't get it all right, but I do know that being on following him, and that's the only thing oftentimes I attribute it to, because I've made plenty of mistakes even since. But staying under his grace and totally reliant and dependent on that has given me the power to live a pretty righteous existence now. So
You're doing great. You're helping a lot of people, and I appreciate your time in this, and we're going to have to continue this story again.
yeah.